Hello, hello. Welcome. We are working on Loki tonight. Um, this is a pet portrait for my brother, actually, and his dog, quarantine puppy, but beagle, foxhound, lab mix. My parents have the beagle. That's why I cross them sometimes because they are playmates and best friends. So, but that is what we're working on tonight. Specifically, I'm going to be working on this background area to kind of give you an idea of what we're doing. I'm combining a couple of images here. This is sort of teenager Loki. So I've got a picture of him that is from that age, but I also have, we really like the background from a picture when he was really, really teeny. And it had this nice blue background, wood flooring, which you can't see quite so much on camera here. It's only fill-in color blocking underlayer at the moment, so it's not all that interesting. But what it is I'm using, it's a cabinetry, actually, that it is. And so I will pull that up real quick. So that is baby Loki. He was teeny tiny at that point, at least compared to like the 60 odd pounds he is now. And the background is what I'm sort of aiming at, those cabinets. I'm not keeping the shadowing exactly the same, just because there's a table in the way there. That's casting that large shadow you see across the background. But I do like having some of the cabinets. I do want the background to be a bit loose. So basically, oh, hey, Meladriel. Yeah, it is baby Loki. He was probably like, I don't know, like 4 months old at the time. Like still could hold him in your arms kind of thing. So real little. But yeah, so what I'm trying to do tonight is work, this is the background we're sort of using for this. Versus him that's in this painting, he's actually more of like teenager Loki. So we're kind of combining two pictures. But what I really need to kind of get down tonight is I'm going to be trying to work on these cabinets in the background. It'd be lovely if there was a way for me to like, I'm used to gesturing as I talk, for those of you that know me. And that's one of those things where I haven't quite figured out how to like make a pointer on OBS as of yet to like show you. But like trying to follow here is that this background has these blue cabinets and they bring out the color of his fur. It really just highlights him. So I want to use that. Make the shadowing not as harsh as it is in the picture, just because there's a large table that's there that's casting that big shadow. So we're kind of smoothing that out. But I do want some of these vertical lines, and I need to get this kind of ledge that's down here. So perspective is what we're working with tonight, really. And so what I will be doing is using good old artist tape to help us out here, because I don't know about y'all, but straight lines are really hard. So it is something that tends to help a lot, especially with something like this where some things in this picture, I'm going to take this off so we can see the painting. There we go. Some things in this, this is not a super realistic painting. It's going to be realistic enough. He's still a little soulless. I do eyes last, just because if you've ever painted or drawn around eyes and fur and things like that, no one wants to do it more than once, and when you start doing all the little details, it's just so much easier to do the eyes last. So he is soulless Loki at the moment. But considering that this has sort of a rough realism to it, more of an expressionist kind of realism where there's like enough but not a whole lot, that's why the background is kind of the way you see it here. So you still need to have it grounded in a little bit of reality. So at the moment, when we kind of see my edges down here, it's very kind of hand done. It's sort of all around, and that can be a vibe. That can be a vibe. But I do want the picture to have a bit more grounding to it, and you can kind of see where when I sketched this in some of the underlayers, you can see some stuff there. But by using artist tape, it's going to make this process a little bit easier. The one thing that I will note to this here is I have not painted on this in a couple of days on purpose. So the one thing you have to watch, even with artist tape, is that if you have layers that are not completely dried, especially if you're like me and I do lots and lots of thin little layers, especially when I'm trying to get sort of textures and techniques, you can pull it up with the tape. So it's not fun. Typically, you can also use washi tape as well, but since I'll be painting over this, I kind of want it to have like a medium level of stick. Like washi tape, if I rub it the wrong way, it's going to come right off, and that's not going to help us at all do a straight line. Something like regular masking tape or, heaven forbid, packing tape, things like that have lots of stick, it's going to take the paint off right with it. This looks like masking tape, and it's a type of it, but it is acid-free. It is made with less tack, so it is going to hold pretty well, but not do too much damage. So I'm going to sort of try to get at least this basic line down here. I need to get where that ridge comes afterwards. And we'll get some vertical lines as well in here. Some of these connect up, some of these don't. But if we get the general idea, we should go from there. And so those of y'all in the chat, you are welcome to lurk. If you've got questions at any point, feel free to ask. It's one of those things that I talk a lot. I will keep talking. If you like that sort of thing, you're in the right place. But always feel free to ask questions if you would like, or just to chat about whatever's going on. I hope you guys are all doing well. Let's see if we can get this lovely ASMR of tape. And I'm going to actually put it just a smidge under this line here where I got it kind of badly. That way I can correct that as I go. What I also need to do is make sure I've got things in perspective, which is always a trick. And what that means, for those of you who don't draw, is that if you ever look at buildings, things that have straight lines, that sort of thing, you end up with everything when you're looking in the horizon. It all kind of goes to a point. Let me gesture towards the camera. It sort of goes to a point. And you'll notice, like, if you're looking down, say, like a city street, and, you know, you're looking way far down it, you'll notice that it starts wide from where you are, and it sort of narrows as you go along. And you can have that. It's easy to see in far away settings. It's a little harder to notice on the everyday when it's just like around your house and things like that. But the same principle applies. And so this is one of those things that we try to mimic that. It makes things feel grounded in reality. It makes things feel like they're sitting sturdy. It's like having, you know, it makes everything feel very solid. So that's what I'm going for here. I will say, if you ever do stuff at home and you find that whatever tape you bought feels like it's got too much stick to it, one of the things I do if I get one, I've had this roll for a little bit, so I kind of know where it is as far as stickiness. You can always just like press it against your clothes, you know, just add some lint to it, and it will stick less, and you can kind of adjust the stickiness that way, and I've done that many times. Looking at my picture again, I'm noticing that I've got kind of a wide chunk here between this line and sort of what I want. I'll bring this back up so we can see. And you know, it's not going to be the exact angle as the picture. Like I said, I'm combining a couple of shots here. But what I'm thinking is, because of the height of my picture and what's going on over here, you know, the camera doesn't fit the whole thing, but really we've only got about this much space between the top of his head and there. So I don't want to make this side so big that it makes it where that bottom of the cabinet sort of takes over. So I think I'm going to end up adjusting this a little bit. You sort of tweak reality a little bit. And I think I'm going to make, especially since he's bigger in this picture, like he was teeny in that first one. He is, like I said, teenager Loki in this one. So he's pretty close to full grown, but lanky as dogs get, you know? So what I think I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shrink this down a little bit, and then this line I will use for the base of the cabinet and kind of make this, yeah, I think I'm going to do that. And if I do that, that makes that second layer pretty thin. This is the talking out loud, figuring it out as you go part, which, you know, it's all part of the thing. It is one of those things where you figure it out as you go, because looking at it, if I've got this now and I make it too small, it's going to make it where he's kind of out of proportion. So this is then where we bend reality and go, okay, either I could, after I do stuff, paint over this and get rid of this line. Or I can accept that I did that. I like the transparent layers that I have here. The thing you can't really get on camera, but you can get in person, is that when you start with transparent colors on a white background, your light shines through it and bounces back at you. So then what happens is there is sort of, I won't say we're like these dark blues, or like there's not really like a glow to these dark blues and sort of thing, but it creates a vibrancy that isn't quite there otherwise. So I don't want to really get rid of that, and I have to do a lot of transparent layers to cover that sort of thing. Like it's not going to work. So what we can do is ignore this. This is going to be a bit thicker, and that'll be fine. So the part you see over here is that this, because I used more whites and light blues, those are more opaque, it covered that line. So it gives me a little bit of flexibility as I kind of create my perspective to adjust it over here. Because up close, because I know what I'm looking for, I can spot it over here. But it's not visible. It is me really nitpicking where I see like a single brush stroke that nobody who is not like slightly obsessive artist is not gonna see that sort of thing. So tape number 2, what we want to do is keep in mind that this is going off into the distance. Yes, it's in the background. Yes, he's right in front of it, but this means it's not going to be a perfectly parallel line. I need to angle it slightly. So what you typically do if you're doing a drawing is you might pick somewhere on the page, or even like off the page, to do kind of a dot, and then you draw all your lines to that dot, and that's how you measure it up. And that's like when you're looking down the city street doing the very severe looking perspective, and that makes for a very dramatic effect. It can be really, really great. He's in front of some cabinets in a kitchen. I don't want this to be like over dramatic. I don't want the background to really be what draws the attention. Like, this is not a landscape. He needs to be front and center. So it's going to be close but not quite parallel lines. So I know that I've got that line there that I want to use, and it's got to go across, all the way across this painting. So I'll start by making it parallel, and then what I'll do is I will adjust it ever so slightly. If you can see me, I think you can see on camera, see me adjust that. So this is parallel. Is right about there. And then what I'll do is I will shift it ever so slightly because I want that slight bit of perspective. And we will press that down. Now, I'm not pressing hard on this because even though it's a low tack tape, I don't want it to like stick like crazy, especially not across his fur. That's also why I waited for this to dry. Loki in cabinet space. You know, I was very tempted. When I asked my brother what he wanted with this, and we were going through pictures and various things, I was like, whoa, do you want him like in a place, or do you want like a very abstract background? Above me, you can see like various paintings circling through. And so a lot of these are abstracts, and so you can kind of know what I would do with that. And I'm getting warnings that my mic is too loud, so I'm going to turn the gain down just slightly. But if you have problems hearing me, or if you're hearing too much of me, let me know. Anyways, so there are some elephants that are in one of the pictures rotating around. And they're in a very like, what feels like spacey kind of abstract sort of thing. So that was something that was an option for us to do. But my brother wanted him like kind of more grounded, which, you know, totally his call. And it'll like, I do love the blue colors. And these cabinets are in my parents' place. So it's like, you know, if I ever needed easy reference, or if I didn't have that one picture, it made it where it was really simple to like, if I needed more pictures, I could go and get it. And it was also like a familiar place, which is a good place to, you know, put him, you know, since it'll be for there's that picture right there. But it'll be a good place for him just because it's, you know, a familiar spot. It'll be familiar to my brother. It makes it where just the whole vibe when it's your dog, it's nice to have that sort of thing going on here. Okay, so I've got my two basic lines, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be painting above these lines. I can make this if I wanted really super straight and put another piece of tape right above this so that the straight line, you know, is straight on both sides, and that way it's a very precise line. I don't think I need that. Like I said, it is a little bit looser, but to have like those grounding points is going to be really good. The other thing I want to look at is that there aren't just horizontal lines going on here. There are vertical lines. So if I look at this, we've got cabinets, and you can kind of see where, like I said, when I was talking about the perspective, where it kind of slants off into the distance. It's fairly severe in this picture, just based on, you know, the angle of aiming down at a puppy tends to create that. But I need some vertical lines here too, because you also I've got my base line there, which you can see where the power outlet is. I've got my line there. I've got the base of the cabinet, that shadow line that I want. And so after that, I have basically a line where the inset to the cabinet starts. That's another horizontal line. But really what's more important to me at the moment are those vertical lines. And that's because those horizontals right there are shorter. I could fill those in. I could also paint basically these lines here and these lines here, and then I could just fill that in. I could also cheat a little bit and not make that where it's like this bottom here is sort of the base of the cabinet, because there's not going to be but so many in this background. I'm not making it as severe as the original picture, and the dog's bigger, so it wouldn't make sense to have, you know, tons and tons of cabinets in the background, because his size relative to the cabinets is quite different now too. So that is something that I want to consider. So I think that's one of those things where I will go ahead and do this. I will add some vertical lines. I'm thinking to frame him, I probably want to not worry so much about the technicalities here. I want to maybe do something where I have, since it is a darker shadowed line, put one maybe right here, right sort of where his ear is, because that will draw attention to his face. And I like that. I like his face. We want to focus in on his face. Going doggo style. Yes, pretty much. And then, let's see. I didn't realize this was the first time in the chat. I guess because last time it didn't let you do what it didn't let you actually like play in the chat. So hopefully whatever setting was off on my end, I fixed it, and now you can participate without a problem. So here's hoping. All this stuff is still very new, and I'm learning as I go. Okay, so I think I want a line about here to kind of highlight and frame his face. And then the other one, since the cabinets are going to be kind of larger, instead of having it so many lines, I think I want to make another one, and it'll be a little bit of a lighter, maybe a thinner line, like the same color to give that shadow. But I really do want maybe right around here to have one. And that way it sort of frames his face. Like I said, I think this is going to be darker because I really want this to kind of ground where he is. And this is going to be much more subtle. This is where I bend reality a little bit because there's no good reason for the light to be coming from over here and for there not to be like in a cabinet, you've got a pretty sharp shadow. And I don't know that I want that with him. The joy of this is if I do all this and I'm wrong on this one, it's easier to go darker. So that's pretty good. Oh, you still had to verify. Yeah, the privacy settings, like there's things to help prevent, you know, getting like completely trashed by trolls coming in. But there was one of those things where it said like either people could, you know, verify either a phone number or an email address, or they could be a follower for over a week. So I was like, there's no good reason for you not to be able to participate. You know, that should have just worked. So I do not know. But theoretically, it should have worked. But it's Twitch. I'm sure there's some just wonky things that I find it as I go. So let's see. So for here, we want to do another big line. I think that's enough tape. The nice thing about this tape too is that if it's still got some tack once you're done with it, like I'm doing this tonight, I will be removing this tonight. I'm not letting the paint dry on this. That's just because I don't want it to like peel up as I peel this up. If you've ever seen people do where they've used tape or even washi tape with watercolors, I've used washi tape with watercolors because watercolor paper is more delicate than what this is, especially since I've let this cure. You know, you can wait till the watercolor dries and peel that up. You can even use a hair dryer to like loosen the adhesive on the tape and then peel it up, and you're not going to affect the watercolor. Acrylic is like plastic. So yes, you could use like a hair dryer, but you're going to dry the paint. You could also, if it's a thicker layer, which I'm not doing tonight, but if I was doing thicker stuff, you could crack it, which is never fun. And then, let's see. Yeah, we're going to put you right about there. But what I don't want is I don't want it to dry on there and then have it where it, hello, headphones. What are you doing? Got all sorts of alerts going on in my ears, and I don't know why. As long as my microphone's still working, my microphone is still working. That was the part I was worried about, was the microphone. And that is, in fact, not the problem at all tonight. So, but the headphones are back. I can hear what I need to hear. So, technology. Yeah, I haven't been able to sick my Russian bots on you. You know, I wouldn't doubt that you might actually have, like, your own fleet of Russian bots. But I also am like, I feel like I would be highly entertained by your bots. Like, this wouldn't be the hate raid stuff that some people have gotten. Like, I feel like I would just be cracking up at it. Not saying that you should do this. I'm pretty sure it violates some of the terms of services, and then you'll get you just got into my chat, you just were able to participate, and it'll be gone. So, don't know what to tell you there. So maybe create a different account that you then verify, and then use that to launch your horde of bots. So this one's gonna be longer. We're gonna put you, because I need to put it slightly to the side of what I'm doing. I've got this one going on the left hand side. Let's keep that even so that I know what I'm doing, or at least pretend to know what I'm doing. And we will do this. Now I'm going to put this here. What I'll end up doing probably at some point is lifting up some of this tape to get these joints, but it'll work for now. So, okay. So I've got that. I'm actually going to check this because I don't know about you, but I'm not great at looking at straight lines just off the top of my head. So this is a lovely T-square. Is it on camera? No. There it is. So yeah, I'm just hooking this to the top of the canvas, and I'm checking, and yeah, that's not right. That is not right. Very gently pull that off. And we will use the T-square this time like I should have been doing. There we go. Because yeah, whoever tells people that if you're a real artist you should be able to draw straight lines, nah. Same thing with like perfect circles. No one does that. He's going to doggo jail. Indecent pupsposure. I mean, he does wander around naked in public. That could be very questionable if he wasn't a very cute dog. Let's see. I actually did that one correctly. Cool. Wasn't expecting that. Cool. So I've got my palette here, and yes, it is a takeout container. They make lots and lots of fancy palettes. I have some of these palettes that are like, made for this sort of thing. However, what I've found is, cleaning out the takeout containers from the Chinese food restaurant down the road, that actually works quite well to keep paint wet. I actually will use a mister and spray it before I close it up. And once I do, I've literally had paint stay wet in here for weeks, which is great when I'm working on multiple things at once. So, true, when I poop on the lawn, I get into trouble. Yeah, if not just from your partner, but I imagine the general public does not appreciate that. So, and hello. I am probably going to mispronounce your name, but I'm going to try. Bestazen Kid for Life. Please tell me how terribly wrong I was on that one. Because I do want to get people's names correctly, but welcome. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this dark blue. It is a bit more transparent. I might have to do more than one layer, especially on this point down here that I have to fix a bit. But it should get me a good way going. I'm less concerned about anything on this side because if I aimed the camera down a little further, there's more of this gap here on the wood that I'm going to have to cover. more of this like peachy brownish kind of color. But this side, since there's so many opaque colors, it's going to cover just fine. Yeah, I could buy a $1 palette from the art store. I have a whole bunch of palettes actually. But what's nice about these is they actually will keep the paint wet. I've had where one painting I was working on, it kept the paint wet for a month. I pretty much just once a week would spritz it with a little water and it would keep in the takeout container. They also, acrylic paint peels out really easily from plastic. So when stuff on here dries, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll take the paint peelings and I will use them in other artworks, either as like texture or highlights and things like that. So it works really well. If you're using anything else like a watercolor or oils especially, this is not going to work well for you. So make it into watercolor. You can to a degree. You do have to be careful with acrylics. I think like Liquitex and some of the other big brands will say like you can mix sort of a 1-to-1 ratio, but after that you risk it like there's not being enough binder in there. So then when it dries, it could start to flake off and peel. Some people can combat that by adding a bit of an acrylic medium. So it's basically like more binder that you put into it to make it really thin. Or they will varnish it a certain way to protect it. But if you go super, super thin with it, like really trying to make it like that really very watery watercolor sort of thing, you do risk the acrylic paint breaking down. So that is something that you have to be careful of. But a lot of times I will use very thin amounts of paint to do layers and layers and layers. And that's typically how I will work with that sort of thing. So you can do quite a bit, just not as much as you can with watercolor. So we'll start over here. Let me get a little bit more water into this just to make it a little looser, just to start. It's expensive for a tiny tube of watercolor. It definitely can be, depending on what brand you're doing. I know I don't have a whole lot of what I would term as the good stuff, just because it's I typically use it in books, like in sketchbooks and things like that. And so whereas I do watercolors, I'm not usually selling them because the middle grade ones I use are not as light fast. That's usually what's more expensive about the watercolors. It's not that they're not popular with artists. There are a huge amount of watercolor artists, and they make some incredible stuff. It's actually really... part of it's because when you get a really good tube of watercolor, like the Schminke, Daniel Smith, things like that, they're really highly concentrated. You're supposed to use like a small dot and then like water to loosen it up. But part of it is actually because the pigments that have to be in them when they're at that high grade professional level have to be able to get those high ratings. I think it's something like they have to be able to withstand 100 years without fading, I believe is the highest ranking for light fastness. The advantage for acrylics and oils is that, you have this other stuff in it to really kind of help with it, and you can varnish it a bit more a bit easier. Like I will use an acrylic varnish on this, and it has like a UV protectant in it. It'll really help keep this longer. You can't really varnish watercolor. Like if you put anything wet on top of it, it's just gonna smear back out. I have seen people use cold wax medium and sort of after everything's really dry, they'll kind of rub that on, but it doesn't give it any UV protection. It just kind of protects it from like wear and tear. Otherwise, people tend to put it behind glass, like museum glass. It's a UV protected frame and glass, basically. So part of that with watercolor is because it picks up pretty easily when you get it wet again. So there's not, like I said, there is some sort of binder in it. Like I think Daniel Smith uses honey as part of their binder, Others will use other types of like, I want to say like xanthanum gum is one of them, but I'm not. I'm not a watercolor primary person, so I'm not sure offhand. But I know it's just it's difficult as far as that goes. But a little tube does go a really long way. So the people who that's their jam, that's their professional what they use. They do a lot with it with that little tube. I've seen people have it last years. I seem smart. Well, thank you. What my friends will tell you is that I just know a lot of random shit. So, one of my careers has been as a librarian, which means I don't know everything, but I know how to find nearly anything as far as if there's a question. So that generally does help as far as these things go. But I like listening to other people and seeing what they like to use, why they like to use it, and then especially like here on Twitch and other places, folks will tell you what they what will sort of bother them about different mediums, because there are people who use a variety of stuff. I'm mostly acrylics. I've used some of the others. Color pencils is another one that I've used quite a bit of, but my knowledge on some of these other ones, like the really like the ins and outs of watercolor, oil paints is another one that I sort of know random things about, but I don't really use it. So I tend to listen to people who use it every day, and I get curious. I sort of operate off of curiosity, and so that's you have curiosity and an internet connection, and that just makes it where I just know all sorts of random things. So, and then actually you came in after some of the others did. So I actually am working off of, I have a couple photos that I'm working on for this portrait, but I'm trying to get this background from this one. Let me put that up there. This is baby Loki. He was like 4 months old. So that's where I'm pulling this blue background, and eventually what'll be like a wood floor. It's kind of just fill-in color at the moment. But the picture itself is more teenage Loki, so that is what I am using there. But it is easier to get the background done at this point, and then start doing fine details on the fur, because these colors are all very opaque, so it'll cover up any bit of the blue. So there's bits and pieces, especially up towards the top here, that I don't have the camera focused on at the moment. There's bits and pieces where the blue is carried over onto the fur just a little bit, like there's a spot here, over here, which is hard to see, but it'll get covered. But if I have to like go back and forth between these various colors, it's gonna make it a pain in the ass real fast. So yeah. So all I'm doing right now is I'm trying to get these cabinet lines in, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not going for like hyper realism. That's never been really my focus with this. But by using the tape for some of these lines, even if it's not totally straight lines as far as I'm painting above these lines at the moment, let me put it where you can see it on camera, it's going to still make it where it feels kind of grounded in reality. And that's what I'm going for, is I want Loki here to feel like he's in a place. And actually these cabinets are in my parents' house, so it is a familiar place, so I do want it to have a bit of that vibe. So that is what we're shooting for here. Do you do any art or any hobbies you like to do? And this goes for anybody in the chat who wants to participate. Let's see. Maybe a little bit of a wobbly line, but it's kind of what we're going for, as long as that base is straight. Trying to teach myself how to paint with acrylics. Well, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I do like acrylics as a beginner medium in the sense that not the people who paint with acrylics are beginners in that sense, but if you've never painted before, the nice thing is that a lot of times you can paint over what you've done if you don't like it. I would say starting out, one of the things that no one really teaches you, like in say like high school art classes and things like that, is to look at your transparent versus opaque colors. And actually what I have is I have a little cheat sheet over here. We'll put this over on the big camera. But you can see that I have just a Sharpie as I ran a line through it. And then what I've been doing is as I've used various colors, or these are some inks that I'm going to use eventually on the fur, basically as I did different mixes, I made swatches to see where did the line show through. And like for instance, this light blue that I used a lot, you can barely see the black line through it. And if you layer it, you certainly can't see it. So if you make mistakes and you want to cover them up, use an opaque color. You'll have a much easier time with it. So I usually tell folks, start with, if you're doing a painting, doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're doing a landscape, if you're doing a doodle, whatever, out of your colors, see what you can start with your transparent ones first, and then move to your opaques. And not only will that give like a nice glow to your painting, but it will also, it'll make it where, like I said, if you don't like something, or when I get to this point up here, when I start doing fur again and I zoom in on it, there's lots of little blue specks in here, and I can just cover that up. Do you add much water to those, or just a wet brush a bit and go? Depends on what you're trying to do. Some places, like if I'm doing, for me, I like doing lots of thin layers for backgrounds. Like it's hard to see sort of on camera, but once I varnish this, and I'll use, like, for me, I like using a glossy varnish because it makes it where these colors will really pop. So that I tend to use much more of a wet brush, and I will spritz my palette every so often and kind of go from there. If you want something like dry brushing, there's a couple of spots in here where I just wanted little highlights of color. I will use a lot less. If I'm using paint and I want it to have like a very chunky texture, I won't use much water at all. It just kind of depends on what you're going for. So I would say experiment and see what you like. That really does make the difference there, as far as testing out, seeing what works for you, and from there making adjustments. At the moment, like, I'm not adding, I've got some water in here because I want these lines, the basic ones, to be down before I pull the tape, because once I pull the tape, I can go back over and I could make them darker. Like, these guidelines will be here, but I don't want the paint to dry too much before I actually pull this off. So at the moment, I'm using more water than I sort of will once I really kind of dig into some of this more. See, and then this side's a little bit lighter. What I will do down here at this joint, yeah, no problem. I figure, if you don't have to learn it the hard way, might as well share, because I know it can be just such a pain in the butt when you're trying to figure it out, and then there's just not as much information. So one of the other things that I learned that folks didn't outright tell me right away, and it makes sense when you think about it, but it's not how we are typically taught in school, is like, oh, red and blue make purple. And they do. They make a very earthy purple. But if you want like a bright, in-your-face pop kind of purple, you need to use pink and not red. So it's one of those things that like there's little things here and there that you sort of figure out along the way. Or I took an online class and it focused in on color, and it was one of those things where I sat there looking at the description of and it went much more to detail. It wasn't just pay for a class and like, hello, we're talking about pink today, but it was a bit more involved. But it's one of those things that until somebody tells you, you don't always know to look. And sometimes you figure it out on your own, and that's all well and good. But you get to, if someone gives you the basics, then you can get to the experimenting and kind of move past some of the frustration a bit earlier. If someone's experimenting and seeing what they like and they're tinkering with it, that's fine. But if they can't make the color they want because they don't know what to add into it, I mean, at this point, that's just frustrating. I'd rather people know. Okay, we'll do this. I'm going to do a little bit of a thinner line for this one. And part of the advantage of waiting until the painting was as dry as it is not just for the tape and not having that pull up anything, but I can basically drag my hand up and down the canvas and not have it cause a mess, which is great. And so, like I said, I'm trying to just get some basics down here so that I have a starting point to jump off from. I want it grounded in reality, but I don't need it to be like super sharp and every little bit, because I'll be tweaking it as we go along here. So those are those lines. So what I'll do is what I tend to do, since you guys have been asking about painting, is I have 2 water cups. I have one for like the ridiculously dirty water. So I'm dipping my brush in that. I don't let it sit in there because it will, over time, dissolve the glue that holds the bristles into your brush. Or that metal plastic piece, the ferrule of the brush that holds the bristles, like it'll eventually take that glue and just get it. So I don't usually do that. But you can kind of dip it in there. The other thing to note if you're using acrylics is try to avoid pointing them down your drain. Because it'll eventually clog your sink. So I tend to have old t-shirts, and I will wipe off my brushes first as much as I can, and then I will rinse it out. Because I paint a lot, I actually use cat litter, and I will pour my paint water into that. So I'll basically rinse my brushes before I get to the sink, and then only do the final bit so that there's not too much actually to go down the sink. That's not something that everybody has to really deal with unless they're doing a lot of painting. I would still not recommend putting it down your sinks. I know some people's sinks and septic systems are really sensitive, so that's not something I would recommend. But as far as like me being cat litter nitpicky on all the things, I wouldn't worry as much about that. Some of the paints that are professional level, like some of the colors will have cadmium and cobalt and things in it, which they're trying to get away from. I have some colors that mimic cadmium but don't actually use like the heavy metals, but they haven't gotten rid of everything yet. And I don't really want those getting into our water system. So I typically will shift it from there to keep it from being that sort of an issue. Have I ever took a sip from the water cup? I have not, but now I feel like I've jinxed myself. Typically what I do is I will put my water cups in 2 very distinct places. Like, my water cup for my drink is over here, and it is in a bright yellow mug, so it makes it very easy for me to spot. I purposely do not use, I know some people use mugs as their like brush cleaning water, And I will not do that because I will confuse it, and that's when I would do something like that. I have put my paintbrush into my water at some point. Like, I've done the opposite. But I found if I keep them separate, and then I also have usually something that looks very obnoxious. Like, this is very obviously not a cup I drink from. So I've done that on purpose to minimize that. What am I drinking? It's just water with some Propel in it. So it's basically like an electrolyte mix. And nothing fancy. I usually go for tea. But at the moment, it's one of those things where I'm supposed to be drinking one of those a day just for medical reasons. And I hadn't really done it, so that's where it is. But I would drink from that. I mean, I can see where it would be tempting. I also feel like you could easily be one of those Tide Pod people because they are very pretty. They look like candy. But I would not recommend it. Especially, it's one thing if you've got, like, the non-toxic paints. Like, when I've done classes with kids and, we're using, like, those paints, I mean, there's going to be some kid who, like, eats part of it or does, like, especially, like, the little kids. Like, it's just, don't badmouth my pods. I mean, you do you, but, I mean, I'm sure the hospital bills won't be fun. But yeah, like, you get sometimes where, like, kids will do things and you're just like, why are you like this? Let's see, maybe you could paint with the pods. Quite possibly. I can't imagine that the Tide Pods are any more toxic than, like, cobalt paints. I've managed to keep from using cadmium in because Liquitex has cadmium free and it mimics those colors. But cobalt is still a big one, among other things, and so I can't imagine if I've got cobalt paints that Tide Pods are any better or really any worse. Hospitals are a scam. I just use essential oils. I mean, that is an option. Let's see, I'm looking at this. I like the lines thus far. I kind of need to clean them up a little bit. But I'm also seeing right around here, which, let me see if I can shift this just a bit so you can see it. Of course, it's going to be right where I've got the my little follower marker. Okay, so if I slide this and don't drop the painting. Nope. It's not going to work. So what we'll do is I'll zoom over here real quick. This is why. And I'll move it back in a second. But what I didn't realize when I put the tape down, I gave myself a gap down here. And I can handle this one of two ways. I could connect this up, or I could put another thin line, which I'm almost leaning towards because then it might make it look a bit more like cabinets. The only trick with that would be I would probably have to duplicate that effect over here, but it would only be like the top part of his head because it's really not going to show down here. But I'm kind of liking the effect maybe of that. I'm just trying to debate and see if that's going to be like too thin to see. Lavender is a balm for many ailments. You know what? There are a good number of herbal things that as they get studied more and more, definitely have some benefits. And I say this because I know you well, and I know what you're doing here is like, but for the people who don't know the like banter vibe we have, we are definitely science people. So, we tease, but it's like that, as my witchy friends put it, you know, charge your crystals, take your meds. But I will say lavender, because that one has been more studied, that does do a lot of thing and a lot of stuff with it. I know for me, like if I have a hard time sleeping, I will make tea that's lavender and chamomile, and that does an awful lot for me. So, and it's just such a simple thing. You do just have to be mindful of stuff. I was looking up passion flower tea at some point just for a random fan fiction thing that came up. And it was one of those things that it's like, oh yeah, this has anti-anxiety properties. People use it in like that kind of tea way to like help with that. But it's also got a huge notice of don't use 2 weeks before surgery. So, because it can affect your anesthesia. So, you know, it's one of those things where always use with caution. I inject 100 cc's an hour every hour of the essential oils. I imagine that burns. I imagine, just based on what I understand about essential oils and the proper dilution of them, in the sense that I understand that there is a proper dilution of them, but I don't know what it is. I imagine that causes burns. So, teas for the win. Yes, teas for the win. That's actually one of those things that I sort of am looking at the point when I actually have like channel points and rewards and whatnot. I think a fun thing to do would be, I have a tea set that is it's meant to be like a tea leaf reading thing, but it's got more of a Magic 8-Ball style to it. Like when you flip over the tea leaves and try to like flip it back over and see what you've got in there, it's basically a yes, no, or maybe. And so I thought it could be fun to do sort of a channel reward that is, you know, kind of like one of the channels I follow is I Paint Burbs. And what she'll do is she'll have like things where, you know, once or twice a stream, something will trigger, but then anybody can participate once it's been triggered. So it's one of those things that I was like, that could be really fun to do, where you've got basically, you know, maybe someone with channel points triggers the tea leaf reading, but it's like, okay, get your questions ready and see what people like, you know, have as their, you know, anybody who wants to put in the chat what their questions are, things like that, just because it would be fun as far as that goes, to like just see what people will put as their like daily yes, no, or maybe sort of thing. The burning is how you know it's working. I mean, fair point. Fair point. Okay, so we got that there. Remembered to use the T-square this time so that I wouldn't F it up as I normally do, because this would be a pain in the butt to repaint. And we're just going to do another, I'm going to do a real thin line for this one, because I really don't want it to dominate over his face. I can always make this a darker line, but making it going too far one direction or another is going to be an issue. But at the moment, just getting this down, I'd rather start subtle and see where we go from there. So I don't know, we'll see how well it shows up on camera, because some of this is pretty light. And then since I'm only doing this one, I should be able to peel this off pretty quickly. Whoop. Let me not pull the whole painting with it. Let me not pull the whole painting with it. The one thing I'm noticing is that since I'm doing this kind of watery, is that I'm getting where it's slipping under the tape a little bit, which normally isn't the issue, but today it is. So I'm going to kind of clean some of this up. Like I said, the nice thing on this side is this side has more opaque paints, so it makes it where I can easily kind of patch over it. I mean, if I don't have to, I don't want to. I'd rather have it done right the first time. But if we are going to be a pain in the butt, it's fixable. because this is also really dark down here too. Now, granted, some of this will be me lighting it up as I go. Like I said, this side's a little easier than this other side, just because these are all transparent paints over here. But I think overall the lines have done pretty well. I just want to add one up above his head where of course you can't see it on camera. But let me see if I can get this joint down here real quick. Right this corner where I had the tape that isn't really showing up. And because this is a commission, some of this will be when I reach, like when we're done with the stream tonight, what I'll end up doing is taking a picture, sending it to my brother. The funny thing is most of the time his feedback is like, that looks great, whatever you want to do. Because that is just my brother's vibe. You know, I usually, if I have got a question, I've got to ask a fairly pointed question when it comes to this sort of thing. But I still like to show him as we go along. That way, if there's any questions, or if he's like, you know, if you could do maybe this, or, you know, he has an idea, that sort of thing, we can go from there. And so I generally like to be very communicative when I am doing commissions. Let's see. So I think what we'll do here is, let's see. I'm going to do that, even though it's not quite on camera, I'm going to do that one line real quick. Because if I get it blocked in, I can tweak it later pretty easily. But I think what I want to work on next is I'll adjust the camera a bit and kind of get this section down here where it's a little too heavy-handed. I mean, I knew that going in. I was trying to cover the, this like pinky neutrally floor area that's not filled in yet. So I was trying to like do that. Dog mustache when, you know what? There's a point when this dries enough that would actually be a really fun prank to pull on my brother, because I really don't think he's watching right now, so he's not going to find out. Not right away, at least. But to send him a picture with, like, I wouldn't actually paint it on, because then I'd have to, like, paint over it, and that's a lot of work I don't want to do. But I could definitely make a fake mustache, put it over here, and just send it to him. So he will know it's fake. He will, like, he knows me too well. He will know that I'm messing with him. But it will make him laugh. It'll make me laugh. So, you know, it works from there. Okay, let's see. This is fairly thin. And then right above his head, I want to make it where it's similar. There is perspective happening. So if anything, it should be slightly thinner, but it's also, I don't want to get too carried away with this. So we'll just kind of block it in there. And that technically does go down here, but honestly, that's not going to show that much. Like, it's showing up a little bit more on camera because it's wet. When it dries, it'll kind of buff into it a little bit. So, you know, that's the thing there. Okay. So that kind of blocks all that in, which is good. What I'll do is I will zoom in on this part real quick, and we're going to try to fix this down here, because that definitely needs to be patched up. And that shouldn't be too bad. It's just going to take just kind of going over it. And I think, yeah, that part is dry now. Nice thing about acrylics is they dry fast, unless you don't want them to, and then it's a pain. But that does make it where I can move on to this pretty quickly, and that'll give me a chance to clean up little bits here. Like, I don't mind if there's too much bits and pieces, but it's one of those things that it doesn't need to be perfect. It does need to be a little bit cleaner than it is. So let me adjust the camera down on this area a bit. And hopefully that should still be in focus. It looks like enough of it is, at least. The trick is on a portrait style painting and a basically a horizontal format that Twitch has, it doesn't always work. The next time I do something that's landscape style, that's gonna work a lot better for this sort of thing. But the nice thing is my camera does zoom. It does move around pretty easily, so that does make it where it's a little bit nicer in that way. So on my palette, I have to remember that it's focused lower now. I do still have that dark blue, but I have some of this lighter blue that I was using. So that'll be sort of the first thing here. And what I'll do is I will also mix it with some of this darker blue that I've still got on my brush. It doesn't have to be super clean. It just has to work, because layers is the thing. So what I will do is I will use this color, and so this is it here. And this is much more opaque, so it is going to cover some of this down here. Eventually what I'll do is I'll start doing these streaks like I did before to mimic the effect. At the moment, I kind of want to get the line about to the thickness that I would like. So it is going to be kind of like a straight across thing at the moment. And if you look at this, it's a little hard to see, but my brush is not very wet. I'm doing that on purpose because I want this to be a bit thicker. I will add just enough water that I can get like a smooth line where I want it, but I do want this to cover. What I will also probably do is at some point, when it gets to like the thickness I want, and this upper layer that I'm painting here dries a little bit more, I probably will go over this with a little bit of a light, what we call a wash, over the dark blue, just because I want it to match a bit more up here. So, this will be a kind of going back and forth to get things matched, to get things tweaked, but I kind of like how this is very transparent. It's not, the other side has a bit more of a heavy-handed feel, in the sense that like it's already a darker background, it's already kind of got that sort of shadowed vibe to it going. I really would like this to I want it to ground the picture, but I don't want it to weigh it down. So that's sort of what I'm working on here. Let's see. So yeah, so at the moment it's kind of a mix of this paint, because it's been in here. It stays wet, but because I haven't been using it, it has gotten to what I refer to as the chunky stage, where I have to kind of mix it around a bit to get it a little bit more fluid. Like I said, I don't want it super wet, but I want it to flow enough that I get a bit of a smooth line here. There we go. Because what I've got down here is a little bit of what, and you're not going to be able to see that on camera, but it's a little more speckly. Important question. Will the portrait age while Loki remains young and vital? I have not heard of any particular deal with Satan over this particular painting. It's one of those things I can bring up to my brother, Chris, and see if he's interested in that. He would need to do the arranging on that. That would be an entirely other fee structure on my part if I had to manage it. But Loki is a sweetheart. It would probably be an NDA involved. Probably. I am just providing the portrait. What happens to it after the fact is, it is totally up to him. So actually the funny thing about this painting when my brother commissioned it, because those of you guys who know me a bit better know that this has been in the works for a while, I am capable of turning around commissions quite quickly, but my brother and I determined that this was going to be not a hard date on it, not a real set timeline for it, which means it's been ongoing for a while. But when it was commissioned, it's one of those things that we would joke to my mother because this is a 14 by 18. No, this is 18 by 24. Is that what this is? It is essentially like, if we're talking teenage Loki, it is a life-size Loki. 12, 18. It is an 18 by 24. So Loki is bigger now, but this is one of those things that we sort of joke about it. But yeah, it is one of those things where it has been on and off for a while, just because of the nature of not setting a deadline. And, you know, when it's siblings, it's one of those things that he was like, and I was like, okay, sure, if you're gonna do that. Normally I wouldn't feel comfortable with it just because people get impatient, but he's pretty chill, so, you know. Okay, I think that gives me a good start on that there. We'll keep that wet in case I need it. And then from here, I'm going to try to make this section not stand out as much. I'm going to basically try to blend in the different colors here. So I will sort of make my paint a little looser in that it'll have a bit more water to it. That way it's, like I said, it'll have to kind of go from thick to thin, because in order to cover where I put the thick, you kind of have to start with that and then layer and layer and layer. So that is usually how these things work, is, for me at least, it is always lots of layers. The trick is making sure that you are not kind of over hashing certain areas too much, or else you will lift up the paint as it starts to dry, which is no fun for anyone. But what we'll do is we'll kind of make little markers here, and I'm kind of just dancing around the canvas. Well, it's a gesso board, but you know what I mean. And that way, because I don't expect this color to layers like an ogre, exactly like an onion. But I don't expect any of the paints I'm playing with right now, even though they've been saved from previous sessions, I don't expect them to exactly match what's happening, just because I'm playing with, you know, what's in this palette. I'm mixing things together. So I am trying to go around the canvas a little bit, and that way it these colors will look like they belong a bit better. And that's sort of the trick I do with that too. So I'm going to do a couple down here because I want it to look like that. And I'm just kind of doing a very thin layer. And I'm letting my brush get dry in some places, so that some places have darker patches of color, as far as more saturated patches of color, and other places will be much lighter. I'm also trying to make sure I remember to go by the ears over here, because otherwise there's just like this little halo that'll be around the dog in one color, and it won't look very well blended in at all. So, and then what I do is I go from here, is right now I'm using this color in the middle here. I will probably start mixing in little bits and pieces of other colors. Like, there are lighter ones over here, so I need to probably move in some of these lighter blues to kind of give some more, just textured feel to this. Because texture can be actual texture that you know, are using thick paint, and you're putting that thick paint on and letting that dry and creating sort of a look with it. But it also can be like, this is very thin, it's very smooth, because I haven't it's been layered, but it's been layered in thin layers. So the texture is more of the appearance of it as opposed to something that is, like I said, very thick paint. I've done the very thick paint stuff too, and it's fun, but I kind of like having this be a more subtle sort of thing. I figure Loki himself is going to end up having a bit more texture as I add more to the fur, just to kind of make him pop off the page a little bit. Not so much that it looks ridiculously like he doesn't belong in the painting or in the background, but I do want to make it where it sort of, in a very subtle way, makes him stand apart. So that is kind of what we're doing here. And so you're going to see where some of this starts to stand out a bit more because of what I'm doing. With the lighter colors, I have to be careful because my light source is this side of the board over here. I have the light coming in basically at his face, but it's not straight at a perpendicular angle. It's not coming in from, a straight line here. It's kind of angled a little bit. So I need to make sure if I'm using lighter paints that I'm putting them more in line with this, and they get fewer and fewer as we move away from that light source. So it's just kind of keeping that in. So this, I'm kind of going a little lighter with it. And if I put too much, I can just layer over it. Like, it'll still show, but I can take a thin layer of something a little more transparent or whatever, and it really goes from there. I'm also trying to make sure that these little areas that I wanted to clean up as I go, that I'm trying to grab a few of those here and there as I do it. Like I said, I'm not going for perfection, but I am trying to really kind of make everything feel like it fits. And if I let the brush get dry, I can do layering that doesn't seem as, I don't know if obvious is the word, but it can have a little bit of a different feel to it. I am going to get some of this off my brush because there's a lot of white on this, which is fine. I needed that, but I need to get something that's a middle tone in there. So some of these other blues that I have, and I have a bunch of, in the background over here, I've got a bunch of blue paints. When I showed you that swatch page I had, there's like 6 different blues that I have out. And so I have things to add in that will be handy, but I also have like mixes of some of these darker colors that I can kind of just basically keep mixing. I am just making where I do, like the marks I just did, and then I mix kind of like a slightly different shade. And so, hello, Mocap, welcome. Am I using acrylics? Yes, I am. I am using acrylics. It's really good for this sort of thing that I'm doing because since I am doing lots and lots of layers to create this part of the background, it dries quickly enough that I can just keep piling it on. So I'm also just not as fond of oils just because you have to have a lot of patience. And while I have patience for some things, waiting like 3 months before I can varnish something is not where I have patience. I checked your Instagram. Nice artwork. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm trying to get better about updating social media. I am never going to be one of those like post everyday people. I don't have the bandwidth for that. I still work full time, and then this is a side gig. I would love to make it full time, but it takes time. But it is one of those things that I try to post as I go along and try to put things up there. So now listen up. Here's a story about a little guy who lives in a blue world. Thank you for that. Well, now I know what to send my brother when, because I don't think I can use that music on online and not get dinged for it, but I can definitely send it to my brother who, for the new folks, he's the one who commissioned this painting. He will thoroughly enjoy that. So, do I use TikTok for your arts? I have a TikTok. I think I have like all of 2 posts on it. Part of my goal with doing Twitch, and I'm relatively new to Twitch, but I've been a viewer and mod and participant and everything on Twitch for a while, mostly for D&D actually. But is that as I do this, I'm also recording it, and I'm hoping that I can take clips from what I'm doing, especially as people ask questions, as they explain things, and I can take those clips and also put them on like Instagram Reels and TikTok and YouTube Shorts and things like that. Because I really love the engagement and the back and forth you get with Twitch, but I also am trying to be clever about it, where I try to take this time that I'm already using and use that to create those clips that work so well on TikTok and Instagram and things like that. I'm not very skilled at it yet. I am sure whatever I pull is going to be clunky for a little bit. But the idea is to get there, and learn as I go. So I do have a TikTok. It's still at La Prima Nerda, but it has very little there at the moment. So it is one of those things where I'm new to posting over there for sure. And so, although I do follow a bunch of people over there, I should actually post more over there because I'm on it and I use it. So I know a couple of us have a few shared friends, and I know I get sent, I'm sure you guys do too, all sorts of reels and things that people suggest to you, and I think I looked today and I have a lot that people were like, you should watch this, and I'm like, I have not I have not touched it in a while, so that is a thing. Although part of the thing that would be fun, just because TikTok is interactive in a different way, is that part of where my name comes from, La Prima Nerda, is that I am a trained opera singer. And a lot of times what they call the leading lady, at least what they used to the historical term, is La Prima Donna. So first lady would be like the person who had the lead role. My name is Sarah Davis. It is a very common name, exceedingly common name, to the point where like my dad, who knows enough about the internet, like he's pretty tech savvy, but there's also like a little bit of a limit. But he was trying to like find a domain name for me, and I was like, please stop. You're not gonna find a domain name for Sarah Davis in like any iteration. So I like that my heritage is Italian, so like that's kind of one of those things that goes with it. But I am also a geek, a nerd, whether it's an opera nerd, whether it's like D&D or, anime fandom stuff, whatever, like I'm in there. But it's one of those things where the name works with it. But I feel like some of the opera stuff could be fun to play with on TikTok because there are a lot of like duets and collabs over there. I have to bounce. It's time to work here in Singapore. I know, you get the late shifts. Thank you for coming on, though. I appreciate it. I'm glad you could chat this time, that Twitch actually cooperated. And I hope that the rest of the evening goes well for you. So thanks for dropping in. And then since we've got a couple new people, I'll kind of bring up the picture again since I haven't shown it in a while. Basically, this picture, and we're zoomed in on a part of a background at the moment, but I'm combining sort of 2 pictures. One from when Loki was kind of like, I refer to him as teenager Loki, and that's kind of where his body and pose and like that's coming from. The background is coming from where we call baby Loki. And here we go. And that's in my parents' kitchen. They have these blue cabinets, and it really offsets his fur quite nicely. So I took it and we're running with it. So that's where I'm pulling this from. I am kind of doing where it's not entirely abstract, but I do like having it where there's some grounding in reality, but you can see like the texturing and things I'm doing are not going to be true to the cabinets. Um, but the idea is to get the feel and familiarity of it, um, and to kind of make it where it highlights him even more. His fur was very, very light in that picture. It has gotten darker, which is why this looks a little bit darker. The funny thing is actually now he is very much he's a foxhound yellow lab mix, and so as he's gotten older, um, he's about 2 years old now. He has gotten where he has still got the very pale yellow lab coat, but there are places where it's like a darker blonde, and that's in like the hound patches across him. So he kind of looks like a very blonde hound in a way. So it's very interesting to be painting him at this in between point, and then sort of seeing over time as those patches have developed. It is, like I said, when it comes to like the whole pet parent thing and whatever, like he's not mine, but it's, my brother's dog, so I'm essentially the fur baby aunt. But that's one of those things where it is just so interesting to see how they grow up over time. Because I know like some dogs, like Dalmatians and whatnot, don't get their spots right away, things like that. But like hounds usually come out basically the color they're gonna be. Like that's, you might get a little darkening here and there, but they typically look how they're gonna look. Um, so it's interesting to see he's got this kind of mix of things going. Okay. Just trying to add some things in here. Like I said, this is going to be a process to blend in this bottom. For the people who came in new, I was adding these darker lines at the bottom, and I needed to cover some of where I'd taken this floor up too high. So the thick line was on purpose. But I needed to cover it with some of the lighter color because it got to be where the thick line, it covered what it needed to, but it also made it where it kind of weighed down the side of the painting. So I am layering to like get that to blend in a bit better. And it will. It just takes time and some patience, which is fine. I've got both. Let's see. Although we've been streaming for about an hour and 40 minutes now. So what I should probably do is I probably should put in a break, just to stretch a little bit, let everybody stretch a little bit, and then come back. So maybe like 5 minutes we'll do that. I'll probably just mix up more paint in the interim, like nothing exciting. But we'll go ahead and do that. And let me go ahead and switch this over. And I will see you guys in a few minutes. Thanks for hanging out. All right, I am back. I hope you guys got some water, got to stretch. Um, I feel like as soon as channel points become a thing, that little hydrate one they put on everybody's, it's going to end up being is going to end up being used a lot on me because I realized partway through that I only had a little bit of water in an hour and a half, which when you're talking this much is probably not the best idea. And so, but I purposely put it out of sight so that I wouldn't stick my paintbrush in it. So there is unfortunately two sides to this. So, let's see. So, what I'm going to do next here, still working on this background area. I'm trying to really, like I said, fix this bottom part here. It's getting more blended in, but it's not, there yet. I'm going to mix in some sort of what I call sort of like middle colors in the sense that I've got really dark blues. What I've been using for those dark areas are things like this ultramarine blue, which is very dark, and things like this Prussian blue, which is also very dark. This is both of these are transparent, but this ultramarine is very transparent, so it actually, when it layers on, it feels darker than what this is. But most of what's in my palette feels a little bit darker. I need to mix in some things, and also just get some different tones in here, make sure it still matches the other side pretty well. So I've got this, this is going to look very similar to the other colors, but it is a little bit of a different hue. So even mixed in a little bit is going to give it a different shade, but this is cobalt blue hue. And we were talking about paints earlier and what's in them. When it says hue on it, it means that it actually is not the cobalt pigment. It is something that's imitation. So that is something to look out for. So this one is not the same level of toxicity as if like I had a regular cobalt color. Usually there's cobalt blue hues. There's hues for cadmium. There's hues for Prussian blue, things like that. Liquitex actually, and I'm not sponsored, although if they want to, that would be great. I use so many of their paints. They do have what they call cadmium-free colors. Like the difference is these pigments are very, very light fast. They're very long lasting, and the colors are hard to replicate. So they have ones that are not just cadmium hues, they're cadmium free, like they mimic it so well that they've actually given people the regular one and the fake and had them try to like tell the difference. And a lot of professionals can't tell the difference, so it's pretty cool on that side of it. Cobalt's one of those that they've had a hard time with it in the sense that I know this darker blue tends to, like the hue tends to work pretty well, and this is still highly light fast, like it's still, quite good as far as that goes. I know the teals, like the cobalt teals, I haven't seen anything that's like a cobalt hue of those teals. So I think those are what's really hard to sort of replicate. Not using that at the moment. I am trying to use this other color here, which doesn't look fluorescent, but it's got a fluorescence to it. These little tubes, though, are a bit of a pain in the ass. So because it's a much more fluid paint, which works well for what I'm doing on this one. Like it's called their soft body. So I'm not doing, like I said, thick, heavy textures. I don't need that sort of thing. But these things get clogged so frequently. I was trying to, like, as the timer was counting down on the break, I was trying to get this sucker unclogged so I could get some of the paint out. And it's just not cooperating. So, it's one of those things where I end up unscrewing the cap, hoping I don't get myself in the process, and kind of removing it from that point. Usually what I do, because I didn't put a palette knife out here because I wasn't thinking about it, is then I would take the end of a paintbrush and scoop out some, and then just wipe it off with one of my t-shirts. Because I don't need a whole lot here. I'm just trying to get tints so I can get lots of different blues. So we're going to put this down here. I just don't like this method as much as just getting it straight from the tube because it can be a little bit wasteful. I am going to do the thing where, like, I have this, I'm going to, like, scrape it off inside of this thing to try to minimize it, but it's not the best. I like the idea of these containers. They also seem like they would be really easily refillable from like Liquitex makes like, and Golden and the others make really big honkin' amounts of paint. I know I have a white back here that this is a rather large amount of paint. So it does make it where it would be easy to refill because they sell bigger bottles of this where it's still got the spout, and you could just, especially if you traveling, if you're going to a class, if you're doing whatever, you can just pour one into this. You could just keep refilling the smaller container, but they clog so easily. I usually have, and I was trying to do it when I had the brake thing up and it was just taking too long, but I usually take a paper clip that, you've unfolded and mangled, and I usually end up shoving it in the tip and hoping that does it. And a lot of times it does to a certain extent. The paint was still not coming out, so we're doing this. Like I said, I love the thought. It just doesn't seem to hold up in practice. And I maybe it's just like because if you were using particular colors, high volume tremendously, like I've probably had this for about like 6-8 months, something like that. Like I use it, but since it is like a brighter blue, I tend to use it more as a tint. Like I kind of mix it into stuff and then putting it straight on the canvas. Or if I do, I put it in small amounts. So I'm guessing part of this might just be if you use it more frequently, then it doesn't clog as much, but I don't know. The other thing I'm going to pull from over here is this, and this is much more opaque, but it's a lighter color, but you can see where it's kind of a middle in here between these lights and darks. So I like having that to mix in as well. I do have this very light blue as well, which you'll notice I have lots of different bottles. Some of them say basics, some of them say like heavy body, some of them say... It's all about what you use in different things. I do like the Liquitex basics. Like these are the student grades. I know a couple of people were saying that they are new to painting, and these are a great value for what you get. They're still just as light fast. You're not going to have like, if you have a teal, it's not going to be a cobalt teal. Like they're all going to be hues. They're not going to be like those heavy pigments to them, but they're still going to function really, really well. The nice thing about them is they layer well, they mix well. It's just kind of like the only difference really is the amount of pigment. It's not so much that it's like a lesser quality. It's more that if you have something like this, it's gonna be like, first off, this is heavy body, so it's like a thick paint. I'm mixing a bunch of different things here because since I'm just doing this in layers and layers and layers, I can get away with that. I can mix the different types of paints and it's fine. If I had something much more delicate, this heavy body would be a pain and it wouldn't work well. If you're someone who does like D&D minifigures, definitely do not use the heavy body. It will not work. But yeah, it's one of those things that those basics paints, they do an awful lot, which is great because they're pretty inexpensive. They go on sale pretty regularly. You can get them in good volume. So it is a nice thing to have. Like I said, I tend to use it if I know I've got colors that, if I know I'm mixing a lot. Like I've got certain colors, I've got them in like the heavy body ones that I need to use for certain effects. But if I know I'm going to be mixing it with other colors, I'll buy the basics and I'll mix that in because I know I don't want it to be like the same potency for that sort of application. So you can save yourself some money for some of this stuff. Like some people are very much like the purist mindset of, oh, well, I only use the highest grade paints, and it's like you can do that. My rule of thumb is as long as the paint will last, as long as it's light fast. Like for me, selling it. If you're practicing at home and whatever, like no, just understand that like if it's something you want to hang on to, you might want to varnish it, or take a photograph of it, or just protect it in some other way. But you don't need to like go crazy on it when you're learning. But the nice thing with acrylics is that you can get good light fast paints for pretty cheap. Brushes, I would say, starting out with it, because I have a mix of things. I have some like really cheap like brushes that, work well for certain effects. I would say starting out, getting something that is not a watercolor brush, just because those are very, very soft, and so they're not going to hold up the same way. But like, for instance, this one, which is just one I have hanging out here, the bristles, I've got it too high. The bristles still kind of spring back. Like, it's not super, it's got a softness to it, but it's still stiff enough to hold the paint. That'll give you fairly versatile range of things you can do with it until you figure out what you like. And then, like, if you want the really stiff brushes, like one of the ones I'm using here, and this is like a much more expensive brush, but there's a reason for it. These are Princeton Catalyst brushes, and part of this is because there's like sciencey things to it. Like, the bristles are made in a way that they hold more paint per bristle, because they're like, it's like chinchilla fur in the sense that it's not actually, they're all synthetic, but it's like chinchilla fur splits in lots of different directions. And like, this has that same idea to it. So it holds a lot more paint, and it like can do certain things that I like. But I don't use it for everything. So I wouldn't spend tons and tons of money on brushes that are really expensive until you know what you like. I would say I've used, let's see, the one I have over here, and this I got from Jerry's Artorama, which is an online store, but they also have, because I know you're Midwest, so I don't know if they extend out there, but Dick Blick's does, and they'd have something similar. Like, this is Creative Mark. Like, it's one of their like house brand kind of things, and I'm sure Dick Blick has something like that too, where it's got a good, it's a good value to it. I don't expect it to last forever, but it lets me do, if I want stuff that is very smooth and very blended, it lets me do that. But it also, like, if I want something that's thicker and chunkier, like, some of the other paintings I've done, there's a tulip one that's floating around in the thing. Even this, see, that was a palette knife. But there's a couple others that I have like more texture to them, and it lets me do that sort of thing, and it doesn't have a problem with it. It's not going to be as stiff as this sucker. And like I said, I'm kind of using this for like maybe not the best application at the moment, but it's also like, I will only have 1 or 2 brushes to clean at the end of this. So some of this is me being me. But I would say that Michaels has certain things. I haven't used their Artist Loft brushes, but I know they had a brand there called Zen. They're like silver brushes. The barrel is like a silver color. And I still have some of those. They're like pretty cheap brushes. They go on sale all the time. But they held up pretty well. They do well with acrylics. They're synthetic. I would say there's not really much of a reason for you to go to like natural hair brushes. Some people really like them for certain things, but you also have to take care of them. You have to make sure you clean them. If you're someone who, especially as you're learning, might beat up your brushes, like I know I can do some damage on mine. But like, I have another artist friend of mine that she purposely will not buy any animal hair brushes, and not for like humane reasons and things like that. Like, they do have ways of, from what I understand, a lot of companies now can get the bristles and fur for these things without harming the animals. But like, if you don't take care of them, you're buying expensive brushes that are going to get trashed. So why spend the money on it? And the synthetic stuff now has gotten so good that why? But yeah, like I said, I know Michaels had one that was called Zen, and Creative Mark's another good one to kind of start with. Dick Blick offhand, like I said, I'm not sure, because they don't have a store local to me. I've ordered offline, but it means I haven't really like had my hands on their brushes. I know they have a store in DC, which doesn't help you, but like that's the only one I've been into, and I didn't look at brushes at that point. But yeah, I would say like a lot of times Michaels has like a mid grade. Like they usually have their stuff separated now too, where they're like level 1, 2, and 3. The level 1 stuff, unless they've changed it, tends to fall apart pretty quickly, or it won't really hold the paint well. Like it'll feel like you're always trying to like scoop up paint, like it won't carry it, but so far. Or the bristles won't be stiff enough where like if you've ever seen like a watercolor brush where it's almost like a makeup brush. Like it can have that like, not so much, although you do get watercolor brushes that are very fluffy, but it will have that feel of like how soft the bristles are. Watercolor has that kind of bendability to it, and that doesn't help you with acrylics as much. Like if you're doing certain techniques, like I have a big poofy makeup brush that I specifically bought because I saw a technique on how people do clouds and do like the fluffy edges with acrylics, and they use a makeup brush for that. And I was like, that's really cool. But like day-to-day painting, it would drive me insane. So yeah, I would say go something like that. Like you don't need to get anything real expensive or stuff like that. I would get even just a couple of brushes that are just, depending on what you want to paint, this kind of size, and I'll try to put this in the camera. I know it doesn't look it, but it's called a round. And it's because and I can't because it's a long bristle, so it's a long handle, so it's not going to sit in the camera very well. But it's because when you look at how this is shaped, it's round looking at it overhead of the bristles. So you can have one that are sort of like this, and they have a little bit of a point. They're pretty versatile. So a round would be good because it would give you options with that point. I've also found that people who like having, straight lines or like having the ability to kind of chunk out blocks, getting something like what's called a flat brush. And that's the one where it's like literally cut square across. So that can help. Smaller detail, smaller canvas. A round can be really versatile. So like I have some teeny tiny round brushes that I can use for like signing my name or whatever. Although at that point I've learned to like find paint pens because they work so much better for that. But a round, like a lot of times, depending upon the style of brush, different brands have different sort of things. But if you get a round that has like a long point, like this one is a very kind of blunt point on that. Let me see if it's within reach. Because I do have, and this again goes into the Princeton line, which is like Princeton has like I think student grade brushes and then like has higher level ones. It just depends on what your art store carries and whatnot. But like, so like it's just what I have handy because like I said, at this point I know what works for me and what lasts. So, I'd rather pay like if I've got a brush, like these Princeton brushes, depending upon the size, can be like I think this one is something like $15 for the brush kind of thing, which is expensive for a brush. Like I don't suggest going that any way, shape, or form. But I'm doing this professionally. It will last me years and years and years. So especially if I take care of it. So that makes sense for me. But like this is also a round brush, but it has this nice long point on it. So even though it's a bigger brush when you look at it, when you think about details, I can actually use this point to get very tiny details. So sometimes you can kind of do a 2-for-1 where you get a little bit of a bigger brush, and when you drag it across things, this one's a little stiff because it's got some, like there's brush preservatives that can go into it to keep things from getting damaged. So, but like if I loosen it up a little bit, you can see that it would spread out over a wide area, but also I have that teeny tiny point. So sometimes if you find, even a larger round, this is like they have different sizes in numbers on them. This one says 14. It varies by brand, but like a 6 or an 8 is usually a pretty average, like that's a good size, but it also, if it's got a good point on it, you might be able to double duty it. So that could be something to keep an eye out for. As far as that goes, let's see. if it will go back in the thing. I do like my small detail brushes. I will say, like, for a while before I got onto the Princeton brushes, I was using those Michael Zen brushes for teeny tiny details. They just they don't last as long when you're using it like this. Like I said, the Princeton brushes I've had for like, some of these I've had for like 4 years now, and they still function really well. Whereas like using the way I do, sometimes those Zen brushes will fall apart over time. Like they just won't hold their shape as well, or they kind of like, I can still use them and I'll still use them for certain things. You know, and I don't think I have one handy at the moment. I'm looking through, I've got a bunch of these like brush holder thingies, because it helps me know what I'm doing. Yeah, some of those ones still work just as well, for certain things, but like they would lose their fine point for me to do details on. I don't know if this is still sold, but this is actually like, I think this is from high school. And this is, I remember, one of the cheaper brushes. I think it's American Painter was one of them. Like, it was definitely like a Michaels thing. So there's usually some mid-grade brushes. I just know that, for instance, when you look at this, it still behaves decently well, but like it gets sort of deformed over time as I use it. So I have to kind of like, if I'm going for those sharp points or details, it's kind of like everything else. Like sometimes those very fine, like precision things, like that's why people have their detail brushes that they're like, this only gets used for detail because they wear out faster. Just because they tend to be smaller, they tend to, you know, it's like anything else. Anything that's small and little tends to take more abuse, even if you don't mean it. Yeah, no problem. Like I said, I know it took a while for me to learn what was going on, and some of it I got from other artists, and some of it just through trial and error. It just depends. Let's see. But yeah, like I said, I've gotten stuff at Michael's, and Michael's, I will say, their coupons aren't as good as they used to be, like pre-pandemic, but they still do. And they were doing it last week, and I don't know if it's still going because I haven't looked at the app. But every time you get those big season changes for them, that's when like their canvases will be 70% off. Or they'll have a deal that's like buy one, get two free kind of thing. Like they'll have some ridiculous thing. And it's when those seasons change. So that's something that, depending on what you're looking for and you use, if you kind of figure out when those sales are, like then I'll time it. And like I said, it depends on what you like to work with. I do work on paper sometimes. I know like people prefer canvas, and they do make canvas paper as well. I do find that canvas paper tends to have like a little bit of a harsher grit. So like if you're doing detail work, it's not going to be fun for you. But doing detail stuff, watercolor paper might work well. So the only thing you have to worry about there is like some of that could crinkle up a little bit. There's ways to flatten it. There's ways to get around stuff. But you know, that could be a thing too. Like basically, if you're doing detail stuff, the smoother the canvas, the smoother the paper is going to suit you a bit better. So that's where we're going to go from there. Yep, bought some canvas and a couple detail brushes. Yep. I usually recommend getting at least one like chunk of a brush in there too, because like if you wanted to do like a background, only having detail brushes, like you find out real fast that's not what you want to do. So that's one of those things where I do recommend that as well. The less I'll pull my hair out too. Yep. That is exactly how that goes. Because when I did that tulip painting, which you can't tell from when it cycles around the screen because it's only like, you know, depending on your screen, an inch or two high. But that actual painting is 30 inches by 40 inches. And I would have lost my mind if I didn't have some some bigger brushes to get some of the things you know, rolling on that. Like it would have it would have been way too big to manage. I would have just lost patience and given up. And so let's see. And then for anybody who's kind of just checking in, I am doing this thing where I'm sort of dancing around the image here because I'm trying to work on this line down here. So I'm just sort of blending in. I know it doesn't look much like, actually when I look at the camera it looks like it's showing up pretty well, but as it dries it kind of blends in more, and it's going to make this bottom area blend in more and more. I just can't just go over just this bottom line or else it's going to be very obvious what I did. So I'm kind of just moving around in different spots, and I'm just sort of tweaking my colors. I'm not keeping it the same exact color every time I come up here. I'm just kind of touching in slightly different bits of other colors just to kind of get this really, like, it's not really so much of a gradient as it is just this, like, I don't know exactly. I'm sure there's a technical term for it, but I'm creating this background and it's just like a bajillion blues. So it's one of those things that it helps add depth to it, and really, sometimes what can make or break a piece is the depth and details. If I was just doing a solid blue background, it could work. It just also means that, like, it's not quite as pleasing to the eye, at least on what I've been seeing and what I've been working with over the past couple of years. Like, this kind of gives it a bit more texture and a bit more movement. There's also one of the artists I studied with, Amira Rahim, who has gorgeous, gorgeous artwork. One of the, like, patterns she teaches you to do is, like, she'll call it, like, falling dots. And it's this concept, like, this sort of thing is very pleasing to, like, the human eye. So, autofocus. Please don't focus just on my shoulder. Like, this is very, something that is nice to look at for humans. So even though our puppy here is the star of the show, giving him a nice background, and he's very solid against this very, like, abstract-y background. Like, he's gonna have a little more texture to him, but he's gonna be kind of like, it's gonna be more like, this is gonna be a little bit more out of focus and this is gonna be more in focus, is kind of the vibe it's gonna get. Like, obviously I've got some sharp lines here and things like that, but it's gonna help make clear that he is the focal point. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here. And what I'm doing, and you can't see the whole thing because of the way the camera is, although I might be able to adjust this a little bit more because I'm noticing that you're kind of getting a lot of space over here. So let me see if I can shift that a little bit. Yeah, you're still not going to be getting the whole thing just because the painting's too big. But there's some of this darker over here. So whereas I'm mostly working on this side, I am taking a little bits of that color every now and again and kind of mixing it with a darker shade over here where we go from light to dark, where, like, he's casting a shadow and it's just further back. But that way the color moves through as well. Like, it's not just, light blue, dark blue. It kind of has where these blues blend into each other. And even though they're all very different blues, they do feel like part of the same whole. If you put one on one side, one of the fun color tricks is, like, if you've got a bunch of color on one side, if you put a few speckles of it on the other side, it kind of, like, tricks your brain into, like, oh, there's like a balance in a sense, which can be fun. Let's see, we'll mix this in with, we'll get a little bit of darker blue there because I want to carry that color over. I'm trying to be careful not to use too many opaques on that left side, though, just because part of the nice thing over here is it's much more transparent. And so even though it's darker, it kind of, in a way, reflects the light a little differently. So I want to make sure I'm maintaining that. So I'm being very subtle, but I am including it. That way it still looks like part of the same whole. It also gives me a chance to clean up a few of these lines over here that I had to... One of the things I can do after the fact too is what I did before with this, the first time I did some of this background stuff, before I did the cabinet marks here, was that I took a color and I thinned it out. I have airbrush medium. You can thin out colors with water with acrylics, but you don't want to like thin it down to like watercolor level. I mean, you can get lucky. I've seen people do it where they really mix it together. But once you get past a 1-to-1 ratio, a lot of the companies say it's like they can't guarantee it's going to hold up. So I will mix a different medium into it, like airbrush medium, to make it that thin, and I will do like a glaze over this. And that will make it where if some of the colors don't look like they're playing nicely together, it kind of like it's a thin transparent layer, and it will make it all, it'll kind of tint it all to sort of match. It can really help even it out. So even if I get done with this tonight, and when it dries, and acrylics always dry a smidge darker, so if it dries a little funky, I can glaze over it once it dries, and that'll help bring it together too. But yeah. Another question I tend to get frequently when people see like me doing stuff like this is like, oh, well, how can I do that but faster? Like, what's the fast way to put in fur? What's the fast way to put in like little details and things like that? And I'm like, there's, there isn't. If you're doing it, you're doing it. So part of my thing here is, yeah, I'm making a few marks here and there and it doesn't look like I'm doing much, but I am sort of looking at the canvas as a whole and I'm trying to balance the colors. So it really does take time. So it's just the nature of the game. But when it's done, if you've done the details and kind of paid attention as you went along, it can come out really nice and it's worth it. So let's see. I want to make sure I'm really getting some of this area down here because that was the goal, one. But I need to make sure that I am doing it in a way that it doesn't look like I'm covering a line I don't like. So that's why I'm bouncing around a lot, because I'm trying to make it where it covers, and it will over time. It just takes layers to do it. But if I just covered that line, it would be very obvious that I'm covering a line. So acrylics are nice that you can easily paint over things. However, it can be really obvious depending on how you do it. So yeah, I'm just kind of just dancing around and putting color in places and trying to keep it balanced where it still looks like this is a pattern but not a pattern. Like it's not as, you know, precise as what you would think of, but it's enough to kind of keep it interesting with the repetition. But I don't want it to be where like it looks like I've got a, you know, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 kind of thing going on. It needs to be a little bit irregular, a little bit more organic. Okay, let's take a little bit of, and I've got a couple different blues going on here. So I'm mixing in, even this is darker, I'm kind of thinning it down and mixing it in with some of the lighter colors. I'm basically just every time you see me kind of switch colors, I'm basically making slight little changes to it And just using that for like 6 or 7 spots, like little streaks that I'm doing. And then I switch it over to something slightly different. And it's just really to make it where there's just a lot of variety without, having to like mix up big batches of color. Because there's no reason to do that here. It just needs to be mixed. And this actually might be slightly dark. But what I can do with that is I can place lighter colors either on top of it or next to it. Like you can tone it down as you go along. So that's why I'm always sort of recalibrating as I go here. Is just to make it, because that is, like I said, a little bit darker. And this is where the light's coming from over in this area. So I can't go too dark with it. But I can put a little bit of this in other areas because it is a bit darker. So that plays nicely with other things. Let's see. So I know that, Meladriel, you've been saying that you have been, painting small canvases and sort of detail work. What kinds of things have you been painting? Like, have you found certain things that you like to paint and certain things that you really would rather not? Because I think we all go through the point of like just trying to figure out what we like painting and what we absolutely hate. So I am curious. Kind of a bit of everything, to be honest. Yep. That's not a bad place to start. Just poke around at different stuff, see what you like. Doing some flowers right now. Mm-hmm. Flowers are really fun in acrylics. I think a lot of my abstracts accidentally become flowers, is what I've found. The layers can build up nicely, which is, like I said, helpful with acrylics. So oils, because they take so long, you can layer lots and lots with oils, but they take so long to dry that if you're just learning, it feels like you're working forever on the same thing. First time really working on layering. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that, like I said, it just takes patience and practice. And so it is the name of the game. Let's see if we can make that a little more defined over here. Some of these areas where the tape I had done earlier just did not. It did well. It did what I wanted, but because I was using thinner, I was thinned down the acrylics, some of it was seeping under it, which I could have pressed it down a little more firmly, but I didn't want to risk it damaging stuff, so now it is the subtle patching over, which is fine. I knew that was going to happen. I just keep reminding myself, progress, not perfection. Exactly. It's one of those things that even when this is done, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be stuff that I'm going to sit there and look at and be like, I could tweak this, I could tweak that. There's a point where you find a stopping point. That, and because to be perfectly honest, and my brother knows this, like, so if this ends up being online somewhere where he sees it, there's a point where you have to figure out, okay, good enough, and you move on to the next thing. It is nice to kind of keep an idea, though, of like, as I work on this, it's like, what am I figuring out here that I can use in the next one? Or what worked well and I can apply? Or like, what sucked? What's one of the things that I would not do again? And so you do figure out as you go along. It's all about that progress and, like I said, just adjusting as you learn. So I would say, because I don't know what you do with the paintings when you're done with them, but if you're not keeping them or anything like that, I would take pictures of them, because then like a year from now, you can look back and see where you started. And then from there, like, because there are points when you're learning where like you might hit a point where you're going up and then you hit a plateau for a while until you hit the next sort of bump. And whenever you hit those like times when you're like, okay, it feels like I'm stuck here and I haven't gotten any better. Like, great. You can kind of look back and see how far you've come. And it helps you get past that mental thing of like, you're seeing where you are now, but not really the distance you came from. So I would recommend, if nothing else, taking pictures, um, maybe just making an album on your phone or something like that, because then you can really look back and uh, it's one of those things where I think everybody is always startled by how far they come just by practice, because it doesn't feel that way when you're doing it. So, see, tone down that spot a little bit. I'll take maybe a bit more of this pure blue here. We'll loosen that up. This one's a little bit more opaque, so I'm going to have to see how this kind of goes on here. And I'm purposely using a bigger brush, even though some of these areas are a bit smaller, like we're going along some of these lines and things like that, because I know if I start getting a small brush and getting too detailed with it, it'll draw the eye too much to it. And I really don't want, like, this is nice, but I want the eye to be over here. So I'm purposely kind of using a bigger brush than what feels comfortable around all these little areas that I'm tinkering with. That's a great idea, and for sure definitely feels like I'm doing just okay until I look back and realize how much more I've learned. And that is everybody, whether you are brand new or a professional. Like, it's one of those things that a lot of folks will always joke when you like go through and you start doing, like, you know, if you're filming a sketchbook tour or something like that, like as a professional. And some people go through a sketchbook and they can clear it and, like, you know, fill a sketchbook in a month or whatever. Like, there's those challenges. And then some of us bounce around from sketchbooks. And so it's like, oh, this sketchbook started 3 years ago. And I gradually filled it up because I was also working in like 3 other sketchbooks. And you'll see how far even you come as a professional. Like, just because you get to that point doesn't mean you stop learning. Like, determining a light source was a whole moment for me. I never had any formal art classes. Yeah. And that's one of those things that, like, there are so many little things that as you go through and you're like, oh, like I was talking about perspective earlier, and perspective is one of those things that can drive people up the wall because it can feel very, very technical, and it can be. You know, I had one college art class, because for a short while I tried to do art and music, which, if you're trying to do that in 4 years, it is not advisable. Please don't. That's one of those things that had more the vibe they had now, I could have done that, but I would have I would have gone part-time to school, worked, and like done the classes over time, sort of thing. But like, one of the assignments we had was to like draw part of like your apartment or dorm room in perspective. And it's like, I think they wanted us to pick like the bathroom. And it was one of those things that I had in one of those exposed sinks where it's like, you've got the sink, but then underneath it is all the pipes and things. And it just, it's like right in the fire as far as trying to learn some of this stuff. So yeah, I would pick little things as you go along, get used to whatever that little thing is, and then move on to the next little thing. Like, it's one of those things that there are like little tips and tricks. Like, you'll find YouTube videos or other types of things as far as things to pay attention to, but like trying to do them all at once will drive you crazy. But yeah, and I will say a lot of people, even professionals, haven't had formal art classes, just because you'll get some who went to college and did that sort of thing for it. You know, my college degree is certainly not in art. I did have formal classes as a kid. Like, I probably had just as many formal art classes as I did like piano lessons and things for a while there. But like that was clearly a privilege and something that like not everybody can do. But there's also so many resources online now. There's so many ways for people to connect and teach each other. So it's one of those things that at some point, you know, people can learn quite a bit, um, and not have to be this thing where like, oh, well, you didn't do this since the age of 7, so I'm sorry. You you were clearly not artist enough. Um, there's so many ways to learn stuff now, so I would definitely take advantage of that. Um, but yeah, and also like you and I are both from the United States. Arts education is not prioritized in schools. Even the private schools I went to, like, did like there was a reason I did outside art classes, because it just wasn't. We had them, but like, and like the teachers did the best they could with what they could do, but like, yeah, it was definitely not not what I would call, uh, you know, overly helpful in that regard. Truth, and same for my private school. Yeah, I remember getting frustrated in high school because teeny tiny high school, like 500 kids in the entire school. And you could do 4 years of art. Like you could take art classes the way it was set up. But like all the requirements we had for languages and other things, like I just could not fit it in. That, and because it was such a small school, scheduling, it did not line up. So like I got to senior year and I could fit in an art class, and they would not let me test out of Art 1. They were like, well, you've never painted before. And I was like, well, I've painted. I have like some things I had done, but I hadn't done like stuff like this or done like, you know. And I was like, I'm not trying to get into AP art. I'm trying to get into like Art 2. Like I don't need Art 1. And they wouldn't let me test. And I got to I got to Art 1, and the teacher we had for Art 1 was one of those ladies who like wanted to be a professional photographer, but it hadn't worked out yet, and so she was very, very bitter about it. So it was one of those art teachers. Um, yeah, so my experience with that was actually like certain days taking over and teaching the class, because I remember one day we were doing portraits, and I want to say it was like self-portraits or something. And oh no, oh yeah, yeah, So she was trying to teach people how to do like draw human faces. And there's a couple ways you can do this. But for beginners, telling them to draw an oval and to like start with an oval and go from there is not helpful, because who draws a symmetrical oval? No one. Absolutely no one. Like, so, so there were people getting very frustrated and very, like, just could not get this thing to work. So I literally just, like, and it was a small class. Like, I think we had all of, like, 10 people in this art room. And I literally just when the teacher had sort of gone off to the side and just, like, was trying to do things, but, like, not really. I looked over at one of my friends that was, like, desperately trying to, like, start drawing a face, and they were trying to draw an oval. And she was just like, can you draw the oval for me? Because I can't get the oval right. And I was like, we are going to start differently. We're going to draw a circle. I don't care how you draw a circle. Like, because you can, like, kind of patch a circle more easily than you can an oval. Like, you can draw a crappy circle and you can kind of, like, sketch around it. Like, there's ways to do it. Or you could grab something off the table and trace. Like, And I was like, do that. And I walked her through, like, adding on a jaw and, like, adding where, like, there's ways you can divide up the face to make it where you at least start with proportions. And, people vary, humans vary, but, like, you can make those choices when you have, like, oh, okay, if I divide the face in half, this is where this goes. Like, you can make a choice for that. And it was one of those things where, like, at a certain point, like I said, I was leading the class, and the teacher was just like, oh, what do you, like, it hadn't occurred to her to teach that. And I don't know if it's because I know most art degrees, they will, even if you're doing photography, will cover basic drawing and things like that. But if you are teaching, a basic drawing class and you're teaching someone how to draw a face and you haven't bothered to like, and I realized the internet was not nearly as robust in like 2001 as it is now, but any beginner art book, like any beginner drawing book, has the same breakdown of the face. And she was just so floored by it. And it was like one of the, like maybe in the first month of school that year. And it was one of those things where I just sort of sat there and was just like, oh, it's going to be one of these years. It's just going to be this. And so, you know, I was not thrilled at all. Was not thrilled. That was one of those classes because we had to do sketchbooks and each week we had to have so many sketches in our sketchbook. But what she also let us do was tape in pictures from magazines that we used as inspiration. And those also counted. So because my school didn't have block scheduling, I had like 7 classes going on at the same time. So I used so many magazine photographs and called it inspiration because I was like, nah, I don't have time for this. That and like you start doing college applications and whatnot, and I was like, I don't know who you're kidding. Like, it's one thing to maintain a sketchbook. It's another thing to be like, I need you to have like 7 to 10 drawings every single week, and you're like, no. Like, not with full-time school, you're not. That, and when, you know, you haven't been taught how to do stuff in a sketchbook, as far as like, we all felt like it had to be drawings and not just like things that you would doodle to learn from, you know, like they felt like they had to be more, maybe not quite finished pieces, but they had to be more substantial than like what most people do in their sketchbooks to like learn and work with. So, you know, so I think I still have that sketchbook somewhere, and there's like so many magazine photos in it. And they're all like, I think one of them, because I forget what it was like Teen People or something. Like, they were something, because there is a teenage Scarlett Johansson picture that I have in one of those sketchbooks that I found years later. And I was just like, I was like, well, this is a difference. Because I don't think my brain ever connected that they were the same person. Trip down inspiration lane. Yeah, I mean, granted, I BS'd a lot of that stuff. Like, I think even the picture I had of her was like, I really liked that. Like, it was some sort of like, I want to say it was like not quite a gothy dress, but it was like that black lacy sort of like, it had that like, I will say Halloween-ish vibe kind of thing. Like, I think I pulled something. Like, there were so many things that I sat there and I just like would write down reasons they were in the sketchbook, and like just enough acting background to like make it believable. But yeah, but she definitely was one of those that like did not want to be there and made it very, very clear that she did not want to be there. So I don't know how long she lasted after that year, just because I know a couple of us made it very clear that she didn't want to be there and that I was teaching the class. So, but yeah, I mean, I hope she's happy or whatever she's doing. Because as an adult, I feel for her. As a kid, I was furious, but as an adult, like, you know, I get that can be really stressful. Don't take it out on the kids, but, you know, I get it. I need to spray this palette again. Some parts of it are getting dry. This is literally just one of those fine misters from like Amazon or whatever. It is nothing fancy. And part of this is because, for folks who don't know, even though it is really, really freaking humid in Virginia where I live, more so right now because we have the remnants of a hurricane sitting on top of us. But for whatever reason, the way the heat is, it will dry stuff out faster. So yeah, it looks fancy, but it's literally just one of those cheap fine, like the continuous spray, like fine misters or whatever. I also use it outside. Like when I've done like art fairs and whatnot, I would bring a painting outside and paint it. And I've misted the painting before too. Because like, yeah, you don't want to overwater your acrylics. Like you're supposed to be at most keeping that 1-to-1 ratio. But if you're outside in summer, you're losing that water faster than you're putting it in. So I've definitely done some of that to like mitigate outside stuff. Although I've learned the hard way to bring stuff like this where it's like, let me do lots of little lines, because anything where I want to do like a really well blended, well mixed background that needs to stay wet for me to do that is not what you do outside. Not unless you want to like slowly bang your head against the wall. Let's see. I think we're getting there. It's just in person, I can still see that line quite clearly. It's not bad. Like when it dries down, it'll be a little better. But I think I actually need to get a little bit chunkier with the paint down here, because while the color is not showing through too well anymore, there's a texture difference. So, and I've been very thin with the layers, which works. Like that's good to an extent. But if I need to cover that, I need to be a little bit more chunky about it. So, and I'm still going kind of thin because I don't want it to get too much so, because I don't want it to detract from actual Loki. But a little bit here and there won't be too bad, and it will help, like I said, a little bit's not going to draw too much attention. I just have to kind of be careful about it. And what I'm doing is, it's still like this particular paint I'm looking at is thinner, so it's not showing up on camera probably as well, that I'm not putting huge swaths of paint, but I'm kind of like, when you put your brush down and you do a swipe and there's maybe that edge to it, I'm kind of leaving that little bit of an edge, because basically if I break up this line down here, texture-wise, then your eye's not going to see it. It's gonna get broken up. But at the moment, it is not getting broken up because of the texture. So that is where I am adjusting it. And I'm even slightly going over this line down here, just because I can clean up the dark color a little bit later if I need to. But what I'm trying to do is make sure that things are broken up enough between the lines that that texture disappears. And I don't want, it's a little bit thinner down here than where this brush, because it's got a tip. I'm not using a brush that's cut off at the bottom. So I need to make sure that I've got this in a way where it will, make a bit of a difference. But I need to add a little bit of this in other places on the canvas, or else it's going to look weird at the bottom. I can have a little bit more at the bottom, because the bottom can be slightly more weighted. Like that can be fine, just because it'll look that way, but I can't overdo it. Otherwise it will look weird. And I don't want it to look weird. At least not in a way I didn't plan it to look weird. So yeah, just slight bits of texture on here. Trying to break it up a little bit. And it'll get there. There's just a certain degree of patience with it. Some people find this sort of stuff very tedious. I sort of find it very almost like a meditation sort of thing, where you sort of can zone into it. This is also really good for, I'm sort of known for when we had all of our games online due to quarantine and whatnot, I would have paintings with this sort of thing going. as you're waiting for your turn in D&D, like I would just be doing this sort of thing and I could still listen to everything going on, but I'd be doing all these detail work, and it would make it where it like I said, it wouldn't impact the game, but since I was sitting still at home waiting, it would just, you know, I don't know if it's just on my end, but it looks like your painting camera is bouncing focus. I wonder if it's trying to catch my hand every time I zoom in, as opposed to, like, I wonder if it's an autofocus thing. Because last time I was able to tell it to not do that, but I wonder if it didn't keep the setting. Give me a second and I'll tap a few buttons. Okay. All right, we'll see if that does it. Theoretically, it should. Like, I know if my shoulder goes way into the foreground, it's gonna focus. But like, I tried to tap an area and see if it would do it. So I don't know if that just made it in general out of focus or. Let's see. Yeah, it's hard for me to see on my end. Let me see if I can. Just because I have like a bunch of screens set up. But there should be a way for me to like fix this. Let me see if I can make OBS bigger for a second and see what I can see. Okay, so my hand's out of focus, but the painting's in focus. I'm trying to get it to not focus on my hand and focus on the spot on the painting. I don't know if that's more stable or not, because I didn't see it happening before, like, until it was reported. Let me try put this. Let's try one more thing. Theoretically, it is a DSLR, so it should not have a problem focusing. I don't see it shifting focus anymore. Is that better from your end? Let me see if I can see it while I'm doing things too. Still shifting slightly. I'm sure it's a setting on this camera, and it's a matter of just figuring out which setting is being the jerk. So, yeah, I'm trying to see, like, as my brush moves in and out, what it's doing, because then maybe I can figure out. there's something with autofocus happening here, which I don't like. Okay, we're gonna try that. It looked like autofocus had reverted back to trying to like focus in on, it says faces and whatnot, and I was like, no. There's also a zone focus, and that's supposed to be what it's doing, because then it's supposed to just be set for this zone. So we're gonna see what it does. It's a lovely thought. We'll see if it actually works. If not, it may be something I have to work on off stream to see what it's doing. Yay, technology. Oh, I know. And it's a DSLR, which is like it's a lovely like, it's not like the fanciest camera, but it's like fancy enough that this should this should play nicely. So, should. The trick is, and I'll have to go back and watch, because I record these so I can catch stuff like this, not just produce clips and whatnot, because as I change settings, I can sort of watch to a certain degree. Like, the screen is over here, the canvas is more like this way, so it makes it where it's hard for me to watch at the same time, like for like the details of focusing. But it shouldn't be doing major shifts anymore, theoretically. And so we're gonna see what it does. If not, I may have to do a little bit more research, or ping Jacob and go, you know, cameras. Yeah, that's a bit where I need to have the chunkier stuff there, because there is texture here, which is fine, but it's making it where that appears to be not as blended in that cover up as I would like. And that's a very kind of bright blue there. So I will be kind of toning that back a little bit in places, just because I don't want having some highlights there is nice, but I do want like the brightest thing to be around Loki. So like there'll be points where this fur, like right at some of the edges, will be white. Not quite to look like backlit or anything. Did that go out of focus? No, I don't think so. But it's a trick. Your eye is drawn to the places with the highest contrast and values. So certain things like eyes, and even this collar. His collar is dark anyways. I kind of purposely darkened it a little bit, just because, like I said, some of that stuff will draw. It doesn't have to be like a drastic thing when you're playing with contrast, but it needs to be, you know, there can be a subtlety to it, but I need to make sure that I don't go overboard with the lights out here. I need to make sure whatever is brightest is on him if I can, or at least nearby him. So if this was something where the dog was not a light colored dog, I would be probably shifting the light source to put it a little bit closer to his face, And that way it would make it where some of that contrast would be there just through lighting. Let's see. See if I can scoop up some more of this. I really, if this would. The nice thing about this is I can use little bits of different colors and use them all up because I just keep mixing and mixing and mixing. And that will make it a bit better. Sorry, I'm still checking the focus if anyone's jumping in and out. I want to make sure it's behaving. As much as technology is apt to behave. Let's see. I need probably a little bit right up there. I'm just trying to break this up a little bit so that, and that's a little bit thinner so I can go broad on that because that'll blend in. Because I want there to be some texture, but not too much. And then let's maybe mix in a little bit of this blue. Make it slightly darker in places. And I'm kind of like scooping paint up onto the brush a little bit. Like I'm not getting huge amounts, but I'm getting enough to get a little bit of that texture so that it will hopefully take away from that little bit of a line that's left down here. If not, when it dries, I'll go in and do some more of that again, because if I keep going over the same areas too much, what'll end up happening is that you end up smoothing it out because you're just kind of touching it and touching it and touching it. So I'm trying to dance around quite a bit, but it's also making sure that I'm not just hitting the, I kind of overlap it a little bit, but I'm trying not to hit the same areas too much on repeat, because then any texture I've put down, I'll end up accidentally smoothing it out, which defeats the purpose. Let's see. What other colors are left on this palette that I can grab and toss in here? This one's a little bit thinner, so I don't know how much texture I'll get out of this, but we're going to try it. We'll kind of load that one up a bit. Sometimes the paints that are a little bit thinner will flatten a bit as they dry, but if I can get a little bit of texture, like I kind of left a little bit of a line there on the edge of the paint, then that helps. I'm also kind of moving my brush, instead of having it more pointed at the canvas, I'm kind of moving it more like this as opposed to like this, to get that long side, because then you kind of get more of that texture on there. I'm kind of more placing paint on there than I am just I'm moving it, to get a streak, but I'm also trying to leave some of the chunkiness on there, essentially. And then we'll kind of move around a little bit to add some of these colors other places. Let's see. Anyways, we will get there. This is one of those things that we were talking about earlier, the things that I would not do again, and I would be much more careful with that line because I wanted it to be thick to cover, but I should have gone over with my brush as it gets tacky. You can smooth out those lines, but I didn't do that, which means I have to fix it after the fact. But prevention would would have been helpful. Let's get a little bit up there. I don't want too much in that darker area, but I want the color to dance around just enough that it's not, it looks like it all belongs to the same thing. And I'll probably go a few more minutes here. It is about 11 p.m. my time, so I won't go too much later because, as I mentioned earlier, I still have a full-time job, and I actually have to work tomorrow. So I'm not sure what my schedule will end up being as far as streaming. I'm kind of playing with different times and seeing what works. Some of it depends on my job, which sometimes will have weekend times depending on what's needed. So it may not be, unfortunately, a set schedule at some point here, but we will find out, and I will try to post things on social media as I know what's going on. That way, anybody who wants to follow along can do so rather easily. It's just, like I said, figuring out the bits and bobs and getting it to where I would love to have a standardized schedule, but I don't think that's going to happen right away. That said, if any of y'all find that you have favorite times that you would like to show up and, paint along, chat along, that sort of thing, let me know. I can't always guarantee it, but I can try to, see what I can do. Let's see. I think we're going to put you a little bit there. We'll kind of get a little bit there. Trying to get this brush, because of the way it holds paint, it is holding on to paint, which is fine, but I have to kind of scrape the brush against the side of my palette to squeeze out the paint that it's so desperately holding on to right now. And that way I can kind of get that look I'm going for. It's just the nature of this brush. It works well for this sort of thing. You just got to know that it's going to hold on to paint like nobody's business. So I have to kind of work within the limits. Let's see, there's a little bit of darker color here, so maybe we'll use a little bit of that to kind of go over that. I don't want to overlap this too much in this area where I've got some texture, because it'll end up smoothing it out by accident. But I can kind of go in certain places and add just a bit more to kind of get this to do a bit more of what I want. And then it's a matter of how it dries down, because acrylic will dry slightly darker but also slightly flatter, unless you're using a medium to really make it the thick stuff. Heavy bodied paint works well for this, but if you want it to be really, really thick, having a medium that is, for that sort of thing. Or some people will actually use old paint chips to create the texture, and then they'll paint over it. They'll just use it as a base. That way they're not wasting the colors that they want. They just waste paint that's already been dried and, essentially not usable in that same way anymore. And so we're getting there. This might need to be glazed, where once it dries, I go over it with a wash just to kind of even it out, because there's some blues and there's little bits of periwinkle and things in here, and it looks nice, but it doesn't look as even as I would like it to be, which is fine. It can be fixed with the glaze. So that may be something I do more on social media, just because you put it on and then you sort of let it dry. And if it's too watery, then it has to be done flat anyway, so it's there's not going to be so much to watch besides literally paint drying. So So that may be something where I post an update picture of before and after of glazing this if I get the texture where I want it. Okay. Come on. I am fighting this paintbrush a little bit. I just... it wants to hold on to everything. It's lovely if you're painting sort of like large areas or you want like large squiggles or things like that for it to like really, you know, have all that paint for. But I'm just trying to do like dollops. And I would like it to like not hold on to everything I put on the brush. It needs to deposit it somewhere. Let's see, this is kind of a dark section over here. I mean, a light section that I could add a little bit of dark, but that'll be some of that spot. I think will have to just come out in the glaze, which is fine. Let's see if we can get a little bit more. And I'm actually not blending these colors all that well when it's on my palette. So there's a little bit of streakiness in here, which adds like kind of a nice like painterly quality to it. Not everybody likes that, but it can be really kind of fun on that. Like it is sort of like a nice way to add some details without it being sort of overbearing on things. Let's see. Just a touch of water there. I don't want that to be totally dry looking. But yeah, I think we're doing pretty well there. So I think will you show us the full painting as it currently is before signing off tonight? Yeah, I can do that. I will have to get behind the camera because it won't fit all on screen, so I will do that and sort of scroll it. But I think I've reached a pretty good stopping point because the painting itself has a lot of paint on at the moment. That's kind of at that tacky stage. And I could keep like adding dollops for a while if I wanted to, but I think I do need to like let it dry, see how it dries, and kind of go from there. So yeah, I think this is probably a good point to, and I have paint on my hands. I am really, really good at getting paint on myself. Thankfully, I'm much better about not getting it necessarily on my clothes, but I do always manage to get it on my person in some way. So yeah, let me go ahead and see if I can get this to show you it. It'll have to kind of be a scroll, but I can do that. So give me just a second. I'll adjust the camera and we'll do that as our sign off. Okay, so that's as close to a full zoom out as I can get the camera to do. But you can kind of see where it's going from there. I'll probably need to, like I said, glaze it a little bit just to make this a little bit more even. This is not going to be a pure, like a smooth gradient per se, because there is a shadow going on here. But some of this back here, like, it would be a little bit closer of a match, so I'll probably glaze it lightly. But yeah, it's coming along. Like I said, it takes a lot of details, a lot of little brush strokes, a lot of little time, but it comes along. Hopefully I can get it where the next time I can actually focus in on more of like maybe his face or something. That way we mix it up. But I think the background will be far enough along that I won't worry so much about accidentally like, you know, painting over bits here and there the same way that I do right now when it's kind of very loose. So I think I can glaze it for next time and have that prepped. The bottom part here with the flooring will be its own thing, but there is a nice divide between the two sections, so I could work more up here and then mix it up a little bit so that it's not just all background all the time. So, but yeah, thank you guys so much for being here and for chatting. I really appreciate it. Feel free to follow on social media. I'm trying to post when I go live, and my plan is to try to post a little bit more lead up time as I know that I have it. So that way we can actually have eventually maybe a schedule. Maybe, you know. So yeah. There's only a couple of us, so I'm not going to worry about a raid tonight just because I know a few folks are probably going to have to get ready for work tomorrow too, not just me. And it's one of those things that I know if you go into a raid and people don't really stay, like it's fine, but like there's only a couple of us, so like the percentages of that is not going to be all that helpful for someone else's stream. So anyways, thank you guys so much. I'm going to sign off here. Have a good night, and I hope that I see you soon. Bye.